he says that in verse 13 of Daniel chapter 4. There was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. And then he said, chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Okay, so the commander told them to do what? Cut it all down. What was he supposed to do with the stump? Right. In the grass, tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. That's the first time, I think, the first time that the word him is used. Because we're talking about, in verse 15, stump and the roots. And then he says, let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let him graze on the beasts, with the beasts on the grass of the earth. It's a stump, first of all, is not a him or a her, right? A stump also is not going to be eating grass. So it's obvious that he's changing here, and he's indicating this is talking about a person, and it explains then why a stump would have to be bound with a band of iron and bronze. Right? Why would you have to? Do you imagine cutting down a tree and then you just tie it down with bronze and brass so that it can't move? Yeah, well, they don't move, right? So it's a nonsensical thing, but it represents a person. Let him, in fact, in verse 16, he goes even further with it. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. All right, so in verse 16 then, what does the term 7 times mean? That's kind of a trick question. I just wanted to see what your translation said. It probably means a complete period of time. Number 7 representing perfection. Some translations I've run across actually say 7 years, but it doesn't say 7 years. It says 7 times. And how long is a time? Yeah. It could be days, months. It probably not days because of what happens, but a long period of time is what we're talking about. And this is the dream that he has. And in fact, in verse 17, this is the decision by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men, and gives it to whomever he will, and sits over it, the lowest of men. And that's when we get into the explanation of what this is about, starting in verse 19. All right, any questions so far about the basics of this? It's pretty simple. All right, let's read 19 through 27. And Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely, and its fruit abundant, and which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in whose branches the birds of the heaven had their home. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. Inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men, your dwelling shall be with beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you after you come to know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. Okay, so what did the giant tree again represent? Nebuchadnezzar. So this is not a dream about his empire. This is a dream about him, and that's an important part of that. According to verse 24, God made the decree. It says, this is the interpretation decree, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon which has come upon my lord the king. So who is that made the decree in this? God, the Most High God, right? Now look in verse 17. Who is the one that made the decree here? The watchers. So this is the decision. This decision is by the decree of the watchers. All right. So how do you explain that? Who is it that made the decree? God. And the watchers. Yeah, it could be related to the Godhead. Yeah. And I'm not trying to make a big deal about this, but it's, things pop out and you think, oh, I never noticed that before. But it's like saying that, if a governor makes a decree well, that'd be hard to say. A governor's aide makes a decree that the governor wants to be made. Who made the decree? Well, technically the assistant did, but the authority comes from where? From the governor. So this is kind of the same thing. It also is important to recognize that the unity that is there, they're not going to be saying anything different from what God would have said, but it is interesting to note that they have some kind of ability to reason and make rational decisions. And it could be that they came to this conclusion and made the decree and God supported it. But still, there's a lot going on. So what was going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar and why? Yeah, he's going to basically lose his mind. And he's going to be out there severely humbled, yes. And that was the reason for it. What was the lesson he had to learn? That God is the one who rules over and notice it doesn't say kingdoms, it says kingdom of men. And that was pretty much a reference to the fact that the Babylonians ran everything. They weren't the only kingdom on the earth, but God is the one who is in control, and it doesn't matter what Nebuchadnezzar is or what he thinks about himself. He certainly had a lot of pride issues that was going on. So then toward the end, verse 28, all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of the 12 months, he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power for the honor of my majesty?" While the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses." That very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. So here he is. He's obviously not taking care of himself. He's lost his mind. He's eating grass, which is going to be difficult in itself. And grass is probably a broader term than we think of. It's not like he's a lawnmower out there. But he's just eating from the ground. That's basically what it's about. And it says they're going to cause him to eat that. Well, I don't know how it worked, or we don't know much about this. Incidentally, from what I've been told, there are records of the king where he just kind of goes missing for a while, and there's no explanation. There's no interaction with him for a period of time with Nebuchadnezzar. And some people are saying, well, that's a confirmation of this. It's possible that they wouldn't have recorded it. What's amazing to me is after this is all said and done, what happened? He's restored back to his kingdom. That's amazing to me. And the reason it's amazing is because what is it that granted him the power and authority that he had? I mean, we know that God did, but what did it take for him to gain that power and authority? No, he was pretty prideful. No, I meant before, to be made king, to be ruler of the earth. What did he do to become ruler of the entire earth, basically? fight, war, kill, destroy. He went and destroyed nation after nation after nation, right? So is this person then someone who is a soft, gentle person? No. When you take over a nation, and we don't understand this here, obviously, but if you take over a nation by power, what did Jesus say about living by the sword? You die by the sword. So if you take over by power, what do you have waiting for you that you're constantly fighting off? Power, right? There's other people with power that want to take over your power. So when you're in a moment of extreme weakness like this, how in the world can you expect to be able to have one day, however long this was, let's say if it was 7 years, he comes to his senses and he looks around and says, okay, I'm ready to be back at the king again. And all the people that are there say, oh, welcome back. Here's your king and your throne and all the power and money. And why didn't the people who were running the country for him while he was, or the empire for him while he was beside himself, why didn't one of them step up and say, I think I'm going to do this now? Just call me ruler. I don't know, but it's amazing that it didn't happen, right? It very easily could have, but what was the promise that God made? His kingdom would be restored to him. There's a lot of strangeness to this, but it is true that this is what happened. So what was he doing right before he was struck with the madness in chapter 4? He's boasting about his kingdom, right? How great my kingdom is. Incidentally, this is a really interesting thing. I'm not suggesting that Daniel made anything up, but God has a way of taking reality, things that happen in real life, and highlighting them to teach a lesson that is really important. Yeah, Joe, what were you going to say? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I agree. In some ways, I think that providence is um, more amazing even than the miracles that he has done in some ways. So yeah, so God is the one who we can credit for him keeping the country. Yeah. Yeah, Herod. Yeah. Yeah. And I think is that Acts 6, somewhere around there, that Herod was eaten with worms and died. God has a way of doing that and can do that, and he does it usually for a lesson. Now here's the thing. Let's think about the context. When was Daniel alive, and what was going on? Where were the Jews when Daniel was alive? Captivity, right. So in this book, the theme of this book is that God is the God of all the nations. He's the one in control of everything, right? Now, who was this written for? Please don't say us. It was, but who was it originally written for? The Jews. Why? Why would they need a message from God saying, I'm the one in control of all the nations? Why would that be important? They didn't, but they're in captivity. Their lives are in shambles. They had to relocate and rebuild their whole lives. They're going to be there for 70 years. And they are oppressed by the people. They had to know that God was the one who was in control. It was a reminder that God is the one who put them there, but it also was a reminder that God is the one who's going to take you out of there, because that promise was made just as often as the one that if we're going to go into captivity. He also said, I'm bringing you back out. Yeah, Adam? Yeah, you're right. So Revelation acts in the same way to teach us basically the same lesson. God's in control. It doesn't matter what's happening in the kingdoms of men. God is the one who's in control. And that's one of the basic lessons of the book of Revelation, which, like you said, that's why the imagery of Daniel is carried over into the book of Revelation. The same lessons going on. It's the same lesson every generation has to get. And so now we have this situation where Nebuchadnezzar is walking around, and he said, is not this great Babylon that I built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? And look at the great things in it. When he's saying that is when he's struck down. What is that message? It emphasizes something, right? Yes. Give glory to God and recognize where it all came from. And that's the lesson. And so as a Jew, you're going to see that and you're like, yeah, you get them, because they recognize the pride of Babylon and the pride of Nebuchadnezzar. And here is a direct statement showing that God humbled him and that God is superior. It's a wonderful idea, actually, that's represented. Let's see here. Verse 33. Well, what does it tell us about his condition? That he was exactly like it said it was going to do. I don't know what eagle's feathers look like. I just assume there's something more happening here to his body, right? Because if you have, your hair doesn't grow any faster if you're eating grass, or any longer if you're eating grass, right? But this is something more. And then the nails grew like bird's claws. So it's obvious he wasn't taking care of himself. He was out of his mind, and he's not in the house anymore. Then look at verse 34. At the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heavens and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? At that time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down. So considering 34, what do you think he means by saying, I lifted my eyes to heaven? He had an epiphany. Yeah, I think that's how we'd say it. He realized that shows there was something going on in there. He had some kind of thought control, or maybe God just allowed him to think for once, and it caused him, wow, what's been going on? He recognized what he's just been doing for the last 7 whatevers, right? But he came to his senses. That's the idea. And he came to his senses in relationship to God, not just where he was and trying to make the best of it. He recognized, God did this to me, and I need to learn a lesson. And that lesson was what? Exactly what we've been saying. God is the one who's in control. And he can also humble people. Have any of us in this room ever been humbled by God? Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, and we can see providence usually in hindsight much easier than seeing it in the present. And it's one of those things, again, we don't know, but we can assume that God's involved in those cases. All right, look at verse 36. What happened when he regained his reason? Just what was said, right? That he would get it back. It said that his counselors and nobles resorted to him. In other words, there was obviously someone running the show, but when he came to his senses, they changed and came back to him. They kept their loyalty to him. So what's the general message for us from this passage? guess there's probably a lot of them. What would you say is the most important idea from this? What? Yeah, give glory to God. He's the one. It's recognition of who He is and what He's done. It's, right. If every generation and every person, think about the leaders, God tends to keep them in power if they follow Him, right? There's so many things that what if that we ruin, but God is always trying to help and bring us along where we should be, and He can teach us great lessons if we're paying attention, if we're actually admit it. And sometimes we have to go through those rough patches that we're really not ourselves before we can actually learn God is the one who we turn to and look for. So, all right, very good. Any thoughts or questions about the chapter? Okay, Belshazzar's feast, chapter 5. We got about 10 more minutes, or 5 more minutes. Let's go ahead and get into this. The Belshazzar is the son of Nabonidus, who was king. Nabonidus was actually the emperor, and he made Belshazzar king of Babylon and of the city. Babylon, of course, was the capital of the Babylonian Empire, so he had a lot of power. And there's a lot of dispute about exactly what happened here. What's depicted here in chapter 5 is the fall of Babylon, and it's not even really mentioned much. It's just kind of one verse that says that there was an anointing of a new king, and you wouldn't know that this was a monumental change in the history of the world because the Persians came in and conquered Babylon. But Babylon was actually the largest city in the world at the time, and they had a lot of innovations. One of their innovations was the fact that their walls. Now Nineveh did this too, but their walls were so big that in Nineveh there were similarities. Nineveh, they had supposedly the walls were so thick that they had chariot races on top of the walls around the city. And Babylon was similar. It had great walls, and it was built in using the Euphrates River as a moat around it. So they found a spot where they could have the Euphrates kind of split and went around it. So that's going to be really hard to access. And so what the Persians did, the Medes and the Persians did, when they came and attacked, they marched and they surrounded the city in the area and diverted the Euphrates. They dug it so it would divert to the place, and they dried up the moat. And supposedly two deserters led the king, or led the general on the easiest paths to get to the city and enter in its gates. And for all purposes, they basically just opened up the gates and let them in. And that was mainly the priests. When I read, I mentioned this before, had some of the details wrong from what I can see now, but they went to the city, but Belshazzar was said to be a very cruel and harsh man. He was a military genius, but he was not very good with politics. And so the people hated him. They wanted him out of there. And the priests, they had a lot of different gods, but they had one in particular where they had a goddess that was for the Babylonians that they had a shrine for there, and he loved to collect other gods, and so he came in and brought these other gods in, which they didn't have a problem with, but the problem was he brought them into their shrine that was dedicated to this one special goddess, and they were the priests of that goddess, so they wanted him out of there. And they're the ones supposedly that when the armies came up, they just opened the doors and let them in. And incidentally, while they were opening the doors and letting them in, everyone else was busy partying. This is a feast, as talked about here in verse 1. The king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of 1,000. Okay, so he wasn't the only one having a party. This was a religious feast day that they're observing, and they're all getting drunk. This is what they did in their feast day, and so they're not worried about these Persians, and they think that everything's great, nothing's going to happen to them, and it could have been more than one day. You know, these people were back then were notorious for having long, extended parties, and anyway, what's going on is they're getting drunk, and the Persians come in and take the city, and several of the places that I've read said that they came in and took the city without killing anyone except for Belshazzar, who tried to escape from them, and they killed him. But there's a lot of discrepancy, but here it's an interesting thing that's going on here. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple, which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Now, it says that Nebuchadnezzar was his father, only in the sense that David is the father of Jesus. There's generations in between. In fact, this is probably 50 years or more after Nebuchadnezzar's death. So he's about 4 or 5 kings down the line, but he is in the same royal descendancy. And so what Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem when he conquered them, he had gold and silver vessels that came from the temple, and he asked for those things to be brought in so that they could drink from them. And in verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. And the king's countenance changed, his thoughts troubled him, so the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple, have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Of course, we know what happens. They bring in Daniel, and he explains to them what's happened. So I'll stop there, and we'll start there again next week. Thanks for your participation.